techniques that the powers that be are using on everyone else. And it could be true. Who knows? It just does not matter if it's true or not. The fact is that the powers that be are going to use this as a self-selecting, categorizing mechanism to get people to opt into a special group, which can then be controlled and manipulated towards their end.
Are there any kind of examples of that type of thing that are visible right now that you could look to?
There are examples. You'll see it in various different forms within, like for instance, some subsets of the New Age movement, some subsets of the radical fundamentalism, both Christian or actually, for that matter, Jewish or Muslim. It doesn't matter. A lot of those groups that want to identify themselves as separate from the larger mass of sheeple that just can't understand why everybody else doesn't see what they see are being targeted with this idea that, oh, well, you're special because, you can see this through this. It means you're not subjected to the mind control, you're resistant to it, and that's because you have this 15% DNA and you're special, therefore, blah, blah, blah. The idea being, of course, that the powers that be who are doing all the mind control have a greater percentage of alien DNA, so you ought to go along with them because you're more akin to them than you are to the rest of humanity.
What are they going to use that once they've established this train of thought or paradigm or whatever? What are they going to use that to do then?
Well, presumably they're going to use it at a period of stress to recruit more minions to saving the butts of the powers that be at the time that the rest of the planet gets a little bit uppity.
Dicey, okay. That kind of makes sense. I see that in the report, that kind of dovetails into the next section, where there's talk of problems with the oceans and food production, maybe disease, obviously the swine flu and other types of diseases, and then financial problems all happening at the same time. Is that the kind of situation that they're trying to beef up against? I mean, do they see this coming, or have they created it, or?
I wouldn't go so far as to provide a cause and an effect relationship between the individuals of the powers that be and all of the problems that beset us.
Sure.
Because there's clearly many that are beyond their level of control.
Right.
All of our solar system, for instance, is experiencing upheaval at a very core level, whether you want to call it, planetary heating or interplanetary heating or warming or whatever. The sun and all of the associated planets, ours included, are suffering effects that are not man-made and are clearly on, if not catastrophic, border on it. And the powers that be also have known this for a number of years, and there's evidence they've been preparing for it since the 1940s. I don't believe they cause it in any way, shape, or form. Now, they could have indeed done things, and may have indeed done things, to prolong the life of the dollar to its current stage so that it fails at a more convenient time for them. But again, the dollar was due to fail simply because paper currency has a finite lifespan. It can only exist so long as it has ability to obtain or incur debt on it, and we've used up the ability to put debt on our dollar. So the dollar's going to die regardless. The fact that it's dying at this particular time, at this juxtaposition of events, doesn't bode well for us because we've got all of this stuff hitting us at once. But I don't really say that the powers that be have engineered that. They may have engineered and tweaked some minor aspects of some of the things they can control, but they're like the rest of us. They're riding this planet through a rather nasty period.
Right. Yeah, I know there's organizations like GATA, G-A-T-A, that talk about evidence of gold manipulation. There's people that talk about a plunge protection team that manipulates stock prices, or the Fed buying bonds. So it's easy to see how in the short run those kinds of things can be influenced. But I would agree that history shows that when you have a fiat currency, it's going to get abused and diluted. And I take it your view from the data and the report is that the value of the dollar is headed south and in the not too distant future. Is that correct?
That's correct. We've reached the ability of the powers that be to stretch out that dollar. The recent huge level of bailouts or infusion of liquidity in spite of the claims that it can be sanitized and not actually hit the economy, have pretty much finished off the ability of the dollar to absorb debt. And bear in mind, that's really what paper currency is the ability to absorb debt over time. And usually they crash between 58 years and 72 years. Ours has been extended because it is the global reserve currency. It was tied to oil. It had been severed from gold. And because we're the largest, meanest army on the planet, we'll bomb you into the Stone Age if you don't take our dollar anymore. Right. All of this came together and prolonged the life of the dollar, but we are actually going to be privileged to live this next year during the period of time in which the dollar dies, and it's going to be just a planetary changing event.
When do you date the beginning of the dollar as a fiat currency? Do you call it 1933, say, when the gold was taken
No. I would actually say from 1913, when the scheme was originally hatched.
The Federal Reserve?
Yes.
Okay.
Because, see, at that point, they were issuing $1, but demanding $1.05 back. And since they were not ever issuing that 5 cents, you were on the road to perdition from that minute onward. Yeah. You were constantly accruing debt on that paper that was issued.
Yeah, it's interesting to look back in history because I wasn't alive in 1913 or 1933, but I was alive in 1964 when they withdrew the silver out of circulation. And I went back and read President Johnson's statement. I don't know whether it was an executive order or what the mechanism was, but I remember reading the justification for taking out the silver and trying to calm the fears of the public.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
So.
But it's bound to happen, and it's just the things that history teaches us. If you go back and look at any currency, they go through these same life cycle processes.
How do you, through the data and whatnot, how do you come out with the timing of this demise of the dollar?
It's a multiple point of entry process. On the data side, what we do is we have emotional values that are assigned as a numeric representation of an emotional quantifier to an individual word. And it might be a 4 or it might be a 20.
Okay.
And it would be 4 days or 20 days if it was an immediacy value, a shorter term kind of a thing. And so from the day we pick up that word, it has a lifespan, if you will, of 4 to 20 days. And this varies on all the different words. They have all these different lifespans in terms of how long they impact you from an emotional viewpoint. And so that gives us our timing clues as to when to predict things. And we have 3 different kinds of data that are all subject to that same sort of a concept. And one of our data is the longer-term data sets. And way back in 2002, we started picking up in the longer-term data that we would be dealing with a period of time in which the dollar would die, and it was projecting it out 7 years at that point. Well, we've lived through those intervening years, and we're at right now to where the death of the dollar is showing up in the immediacy value. It's starting at about 3 weeks. So more or less on the 25th of October, there will be some series of events that will start us off, and then our official death of the dollar period starts from November 4th. And I say official with quotes around it in a smirk because we're far from official. We're a bunch of guys out in the garage in a hole in the woods here in the Northwest. But the dollar is going to die from November 4th, 2009 through November 2nd of 2010.
Can you see any type of what I want to say, like a triggering event or a policy change or
actually, it's already occurred. We'd forecast it for appearing in the week of August 16th to the 22nd. It did occur. It was a triggering event, and you're quite correct. It was a policy change, or rather an announced policy change. The change probably occurred in early June. The policy was, the change that was announced was that China would not go along with the derivative frauds. And we were forecasting that there would be something showing up in the visibility, that is to say the mainstream media, about that time, and we'd been forecasting it for, I think, about 8 months, and that would relate to derivatives. And sure enough, here we go. China says, hey, we've been defrauded by you. We're not going to stand by these screwy contracts.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Now,
and that truly was the triggering event, and we'll all come to realize that over the next 5 or 6 months here.
Right. I guess then going a little further in the report, then you talk about this being the worst possible time in which to try to do business, and you mentioned that it was like the strongest emotional the strongest emotional like register